make your screen full, and I am going to mute everyone. Anuj, you will unmute yourself, and then only you will start your presentation. Kindly unmute yourself and start presentation. Yes, you can start.
1 minute, 1 minute. Sir. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Good evening, teachers. My today's topic for my seminar is bone infection. Usually, the topic of bone infection is synonymous with majority of the people with osteomyelitis, and that too with the pyogenic organism. The definition of osteomyelitis in literal meaning is inflammation of the bone and its marrow. There is another term which is called osteitis. There are two terms which have come up right now. One is osteitis and another is osteomyelitis. The term osteitis means infection of the bone, and the term osteomyelitis means infection of the marrow. So there is a universal acceptance of the term is applied only to the infection by the pyogenic bacteria, and the osteomyelitis caused because of some other organism, be it tuberculosis or syphilis, they are less commonly accepted. It was Nelatin in 1834 who had coined the term osteomyelitis. Osteomyelitis, it could be localized or involvement of all the layers of the bone. It's a very difficult problem and a challenging problem which is confronted by the orthopedic people. Currently, as of now, the morbidity and the mortality, it has come down because of the advent of good antibiotics and surgical intervention. The key to this topic is early diagnosis and treatment, and it needs a multidisciplinary approach. We have multiple classification system. It can be based on the duration of symptoms, based on the mechanism of infection. It could be based on the host response to the disease. Based on the duration of symptom, it could be acute, subacute, or chronic. The time limits which are defining these classes are very vague. Some people consider chronic osteomyelitis to be defined when the symptoms are more than, or the duration is more than 6 weeks. Based on the mechanism of infection, we have exogenous or hematogenous. The exogenous osteomyelitis is caused by open fractures, surgery, or contiguous spread from the infected local tissue. The hematogenous form, it results from bacteremia. For example, a child who had had a dental infection few weeks back may land up in osteomyelitis of the long bones. Based on the host response of the disease, it can be pyogenic or non-pyogenic. The most common organism to be found out in osteomyelitis is Staph aureus. There are other organisms which have also been found. They include group A streptococci, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, Proteus, E. coli, Staph epidermidis. Haemophilus influenza, they are culprit in children who are less than 2 years of age. And in patients who suffer from sickle cell anemia, Salmonella has been found to be the offending organism. Now, my upcoming slides are very important because once we understand the concept, how the osteomyelitis happens, it becomes very easy to understand the treatment modality. Because chronic osteomyelitis is a continuum of acute osteomyelitis, I'll try to cover the pathogenesis of chronic osteomyelitis in the following slides only. What happens is when the infective, at the initiating event, is the infective embolus, it enters the nutrient artery. The nutrient artery is a very small caliber, and it is usually at around the metaphyseal areas that the infective embolus lodges itself. When these vessels are occluded, the bone starts necrosing, as a result of which the surrounding blood vessels starts vasodilatation and there is hyperemia. From when these vasodilated blood vessels, from these leukocytes are poured out into the site of inflammation as an exudate to combat the invaders. When these processes taking place, there is decalcification of the surrounding bone. The importance of this line being, in the radiological finding, we'll see that the area of inflammation or the infection will remain dense, but the area surrounding it will be decalcified or it will appear radiolucent. Following which, the proteolytic enzymes released by the leukocytes, they will destroy the bacteria, necrotic bone, and the medullary elements. The process takes place, builds up, The debris and the exudate, they will increase in amount and they will cause pressure on the adjoining tissues, but they will not yield out because of the rigid, unyielding walls of the bone. When these abscesses, they swell up and the nearby blood vessels compresses. So it starts a vicious cycle, as a result of which the surrounding tissue starts necrosing. Exudate, they will follow, it is always a rule by nature that the exudate will always follow the path of least resistance. So it starts entering the subperiosteal space. The periosteum being very thick, it will not burst out at right moment. There will be accumulation of the exudate, which gradually strips the periosteum as a subperiosteal abscess. There will be an attempt to wall off this infection by forming new trabeculae of the bone. We need to understand that the process of healing and the process of destruction, they take place simultaneously. So the bone, it will try to wall off the infection by forming new trabeculae of the bone. The underlying cortex, because it is deprived of its blood supply, they become necrotic. When these destructive process takes place, in the following weeks, there will be perforation of the periosteum. Once the periosteum is perforated, the spread of the infection takes place in the soft tissues along the fascial planes. Then they will spread down the medullary canal and it will destroy the marrow elements and the blood supply to the cancellous bone and the inner aspect of the cortex. In the advanced stages of osteomyelitis, the cortex, they may be surrounded both on the external as well as internal side by pus, and they are deprived of its blood supply. And we may see in the X-ray that the entire diaphyses have sequestrated. The dead bone which has been formed, they are absorbed by the granulation tissue and also by the osteoclastic activity which has been released by that hyperemic blood vessels. Now the spread of the infection is usually below the epiphyseal plate. It does not extend beyond the epiphyseal plate. This is because the organism has to penetrate the plate, which is not because the virulence of that organism is less. Even if it perforate, the first penetrate the periosteum, then they will spread along the soft tissues, then they have to penetrate the joint capsule, then they will affect the nearby joint. But hip is an exception because the capsule which is attaching to the bone, it is enclosing the metaphysis. So because the metaphysis is inside the joint, the suppurative arthritis takes place easily in the hip. This is an image which explains the pathogenesis step. Supposing that the invading microorganism infect this portion of this bone, the adjoining blood vessels around this bone, it starts vasodilating. The leukocytes gets released from here. The proteolytic enzymes try to destroy this invading microorganism. In due course of time, this abscess starts accumulating and increases in size. It follows the path of least resistance. This is the periosteum. It has not yet breached. There will be subperiosteal abscess formation. Once the periosteum is breached, it comes out. It may travel down the shaft of the diaphysis, or it may come out of the skin if only if the duration of the osteomyelitis is more than 6 weeks, or it may enter the articular joint by penetrating this epiphyseal plate and entering the joint cavity. This is much more simplified diagram. There is an initial infection which is localized to the cortical region, followed by infection which progresses into the subperiosteal space with lifting of the periosteum. Then there is diffuse infection with sequestrum and sinus tract. As I have already told that the process of destruction and the healing takes place simultaneously. The healing process, they may take place at any stage because of natural resistance by the host, or it may be under the influence of the antibiotic if the clinician who have suspected osteomyelitis at the earliest time and have started the patient on antibiotics. So at the earliest stage of minimal destruction, the exudate is resorbed and the new bony trabeculae are formed. Organisms of lesser virulence and or inadequate resistance, and it results in the formation of the persisting abscess. This whole thing is surrounded by a fibrous membrane and it is walled off by a ring of dense bone, which is the infection. They may be reactivated at any time or the organisms are destroyed. This whole process, they may terminate by either the cavities containing the sterile pus, the serous fluid, or the fibrous tissue. Now, what happens in chronic osteomyelitis is if the duration of the osteomyelitis it extends more than 6 weeks and the repair which had taken place before, it stops. So whenever the infective focus is left behind, either it because of inadequate treatment or there is an exacerbation of the acute osteomyelitis. So what the concept is, the attempt at repair is incomplete. That will result in chronic persistence of the infection. Now there is this term which is known as involucrum. The involucrum, it has got multiple openings which are known as cloaca, through which the inside material comes out. What are the things which comes out? They are the exudates, the bone debris, and the sequestra. They may find exit and may pass through the sinus tract to the surface. There is always constant destruction of the neighboring soft tissues in chronic osteomyelitis. When we look at the skin is thinned out, it is distorted and easily traumatized. The skin epithelium, which is lined by squamous epithelium, it tries to grow inwards to line the sinus tract. There is also persistence of drainage irritation, which may cause an epithelioma of the sinus tract. The sinus closes and the cavity may fill with the new bone after the sequestrum has been discharged. Once the sequestrum has completely come out of that cloaca, the sinus may close and the cavity may fill with the new bone. In patients who is having a long-standing chronic osteomyelitis, there are multiple cavities and sequestra which exist throughout the bone. When we look at the gross specimen of the chronic osteomyelitic bone, the shaft will become thickened, irregular, and deformed. So there are certain terms which one needs to have a very clear understanding. What do we mean by sequestrum? Sequestrum is a piece of a dead bone which is surrounded by the granulation tissue, which are usually infected. This sequestrum, it has got a smooth inner surface and a rough outer surface. The duration for the formation of sequestrum usually takes place in 6 weeks' time. And this is the reason that sequestrum is found in chronic osteomyelitis and not in acute osteomyelitis. When we look at the X-ray of a sequestrum, as I already told before, there is decalcification of the normal cortical tissue here, and this is the dead piece of the bone. It will appear radiodense, and the area adjoining it will appear radiolucent. So the sequestrum, they appear denser than the surrounding bone because the decalcification which occurs in the normal bone does not occur in the dead bone. We have different types of sequestrum. It can be ivory, which is found in syphilitic osteomyelitis. It could be black, it could be sandy, it could be crown. It could be tubular sequestrum, which is usually found in patients who are less than 2 years. It could be Bombay sequestrum found in fungal sequestrum. We can have a kissing sequestrum, which is found in patients who are suffering from TB spine or TB knee. We can have a buttonhole sequestrum, which is found in Pott's puffy tumor. Then the involucrum. The term involucrum we mean by it's a dense sclerotic bone which is overlying the sequestrum. The response by the host for the sequestrum is known as involucrum. And the cloaca, they are openings in the involucrum for the pus to drain out. So this is the cloaca and the adjoining tissue is the involucrum. Now, coming to the classification proper, we have been given many classifications. The most commonly used classification is the Wahl-Vogel classification and the Cerny classification. The other classification names are only for theoretical and literature purpose. Wahl-Vogel classification, it was given in the year 1970, and it is the original osteomyelitic staging system. It is based on the pathogenesis. It has classified the osteomyelitis as hematogenous osteomyelitis or osteomyelitis, which is because of a contiguous focus of infection. Now, the contiguous focus of osteomyelitis has been further classified according to the presence or absence of vascular insufficiency. Now, both the above, the hematogenous and the contiguous focus of infection, they are further subclassified as acute or chronic. So we have a hematogenous based on the mechanism of bone infection. We can have a hematogenous contiguous or associated with vascular insufficiency, and based on the duration of infection, we can have an acute or a chronic. Then the most commonly used classification at present is the Cerny classification. It was given in the year 2003, and it takes into account two factors. One is the host immunocompetence factor, and the other which anatomical structure has been involved, and also the histological features of the osteomyelitis. It has been divided into two parts. The first part of this particular system specifies 4 stages. The stage 1, it is confined to the medullary cavity of the bone. For example, hematogenous osteomyelitis, an infection in the presence of an intramedullary rod. So a patient who's having an intramedullary rod which has been infected, it falls under the heading of stage 1 disease. Under stage 2, the osteomyelitis that is involving only the cortical bone and not the medullary cavity. And usually it originates from a direct inoculation or a contiguous focus infection. The stage 1 and stage 2 of Cerny classification, they are managed conservatively, whereas the stage 3 and stage 4 classification, they are managed surgically. The stage 3 classification defines as osteomyelitis, which is involving both the medullary and the cortical bone. The stage 4 is osteomyelitis, which is involving the entire thickness of the bone with the loss of stability as in an infected non-union. The second part of the system, it takes into consideration the physiological status of the host. So we have class A, class B, and class C. Class A represents that the host is normal, both regards to physiology, metabolic, and the immune functions. Class B hosts, they are systemically or locally immunocompromised. Individuals with local and systemic immunodeficiencies are labeled as BLS. Then we have the class C, where the host, the treatment poses a greater risk of harm than osteomyelitis itself. We have to note that the state of the host is the strongest predictor of osteomyelitis treatment failure, and thus the physiological class of the infected individual is often more important than the anatomical stage. The third classification, see, this has been explained in this type. We have type 1, 2, 3, 4. Type 1, if the patient is having an infected intramedullary rod, can be fall under medullary osteomyelitis. Stage 2 is when the cortical bone is involved, that is superficial osteomyelitis. Stage 3, when both the medulla as well as the cortical bone is involved, and it has been termed as localized osteomyelitis. And stage 4 is defined when there is diffuse osteomyelitis. And physiological class A, B, and C. A is good immune system and delivery. Class B is compromised locally or systemically. And class C is which requires suppressive or no treatment. There is minimal disability and treatment is worse than the disease. So it is better not to treat a patient who is having a class C and it is not a surgical candidate. The third classification is the Gordon classification, and it has been proposed for osteomyelitis, which is afflicting the long bone. On the basis of osseous defects using infected tibial non-union and segmental defects, we have type A to type C. Type A, it includes tibial defects and non-unions, but there is no significant segmental loss. Type B is tibial defect, which is more than 3 centimeter, but we have an intact fibula. Type C is including tibial defect, which is more than 3 centimeters, but there is no intact fibula. So the next classification is the GER classification. This classification was given to address the physiology of the wound in osteomyelitis. We can have a simple sinus, we can have a chronic superficial ulcer, we can have multiple sinuses, or we could have multiple skin-lined sinuses. The fifth classification was given by Wieland. They had categorized chronic osteomyelitis as a wound with exposed bone, positive bone culture results, and drainage which is more than 6 months. They had also taken into consideration the soft tissue and the location of the affected bone. In this classification, the type 1 osteomyelitis, we have it's an open exposed bone, but there is no evidence of osseous infection, but with evidence of soft tissue infection. Type 2, they showed circumferential, cortical, and endosteal infection. The type 3, they had revealed cortical and endosteal infection associated with a segmental defect. Now, the sixth classification is a Kelly classification. It has considered the following types of osteomyelitis in adults. We can have hematogenous osteomyelitis, we can have osteomyelitis in a fracture with union, osteomyelitis in a fracture with non-union, or post-operative osteomyelitis without fracture. This classification, it had emphasized the etiology of the infection along with its relation to fracture healing. Now, the clinical presentation for acute osteomyelitis and chronic osteomyelitis are a little different. The clinician needs to have a very high degree of suspicion if a patient who comes with acute osteomyelitis. So the clinician needs to have a high degree of suspicion so as to minimize the delay in the diagnosis and the consequences of such delay. Usually the acute osteomyelitis, they are found in the pediatric population or children. So there are non-specific symptoms such as fever, chills, fatigue, lethargy, or irritability. The classical signs of inflammation, they may also occur, and they usually disappear within 5 to 7 days. And in case of chronic osteomyelitis, we need to have a very detailed history for diagnosis, including information regarding the initial injury and the previous antibiotic and the surgical treatment that the patient had taken. Weight bearing and the function of the involved extremity they are typically disturbed in a case of chronic osteomyelitis. So if you see a patient who had acute osteomyelitis in the past comes to your OPD with weight bearing difficulty or there is a function disability, the clinician should suspect that the patient might have chronic osteomyelitis. The chronic osteomyelitic patient, they have local pain of low grade, there is swelling, there is erythema, edema, they may have also been reported. Once the diagnosis of osteomyelitis has been made, there are certain differential diagnoses that one needs to keep in mind. The differential diagnoses are the crystal arthropathies, the Ewing sarcoma, the septic arthritis, and the sickle cell disease. How do I differentiate? In crystal arthropathies, they have a presentation which is very similar to the septic arthritis, but the diagnosis is made clear by going for an investigation called polarized microscopic examination. In case of gout, we'll have a monosodium urate crystals, and in case of pseudo gout, we'll have calcium pyrophosphate crystals. The other differential is the Ewing sarcoma, because Ewing sarcoma is also quite common in children. So one needs to keep in mind Ewing sarcoma as a differential diagnosis. The Ewing sarcoma clinical presentation, patient comes with fever, pain, malaise, swelling, which are very similar to that of osteomyelitis. There is invasion of the tumor into the periarticular space is very uncommon, but if it is present, it can radiographically mimic septic arthritis. The destruction in case of Ewing sarcoma, this is a very important point. The destruction in Ewing sarcoma is usually confined to the diaphysis and it is more diffuse, whereas in osteomyelitis, the destruction is confined usually to the metaphyseal area and not to the diaphyseal area. Only if the osteomyelitic features has progressed over a period of time, then only the diaphysis is involved, otherwise not. Ewing sarcoma, they respond very rapidly to irradiation, while the osteomyelitis, they do not respond to irradiation. The constitutional symptoms in case of Ewing sarcoma is very less intense, whereas in case of osteomyelitis, it's quite intense. Confirmatory finding for Ewing sarcoma is biopsy. If we do a biopsy, we'll get tumor cells. The third differential diagnosis that one needs to keep is the septic arthritis. The septic arthritic patient, they present with acute pain, swelling, warmth, and a decreased range of motion in a single joint. It is only 40 to 60% of the patient who present with the fever at presentation. And if I go for a lab study and synovial fluid analysis, they will help me in diagnosis. Even despite doing all this, if the diagnosis is being not certain, we can go for an arthrocentesis of the joint, which will give us the purulent synovial fluid. Sickle cell disease is very challenging to differentiate between a vaso-occlusive crisis and an infection such as osteomyelitis. An infectious etiology is less likely if more than one area of the body is affected. Osteomyelitis, they have a tendency to have clinical symptoms like pain, swelling, and fever, developing over a longer time course than a vaso-occlusive crisis. So a sickle cell disease patient will have a shorter time course, whereas an osteomyelitis features patient will have a longer time course. Rheumatic fever, in case of rheumatic fever, the onset of the symptoms are quite gradual, whereas in case of osteomyelitic, it's very acute. The constitutional symptoms are less acute in case of rheumatic fever. The pain and tenderness are also less intense and they are confined to the joint. The involvement is usually monoarticular in case of osteomyelitis, but in case of rheumatic fever, we have multiple joint involvement. There is no role of antibiotic in case of rheumatic fever unless it is complicated. And there is dramatic improvement to salicylics and ACTH in case of rheumatic fever. So how do I work up a patient of osteomyelitis? We can divide the heading of workup into the following. We can go for a lab studies, we can go for an imaging studies, we can go for a biopsy, and followed by histopathological examination. Under lab studies, these investigations are common to both acute and chronic osteomyelitis. There are only subtle differences between the findings of acute osteomyelitis and chronic osteomyelitis. When we go for a complete hemogram of the patient of acute osteomyelitis, we can see leukocytosis, and usually it is around in the range of 30,000. The ESR and the CRP are also raised. We go for an additional investigation of AL, alkaline phosphatase, and serum calcium. Why is it so? Because it is elevated in metastatic and metabolic bone disease. But in cases of osteomyelitis, it is within the normal limit. Supposing that we have gone for a blood culture of osteomyelitis patient, it is usually positive only in around 50% of the patients. So a blood culture report coming out to be negative and you having a high degree of suspicion does not, one should not fail to put that thing into a heading of osteomyelitis. Under the heading of imaging studies, we have starting from conventional radiography and ending to nuclear medicine imaging for the diagnosis of osteomyelitis. Now the radiography will be very clearly understood once we have understood the pathogenesis mechanism. In cases of acute osteomyelitis, supposing a patient who comes to you with fever malaise, in the 5th day of his fever, and we go for an X-ray, that will turn out to be negative. There is no fun of doing an X-ray, although we get an X-ray done only to compare with an X-ray later on. It's negative within the first week or the 10 days. There will be localized area of bone destruction, which is usually observed in the area of the metaphyseal diaphyseal junction, which is surrounded by a wide zone of decalcified bone. In the following weeks, say for more than 2 weeks, we can see periostal shadow, which reflects that the abscess has started trickling down to the subperiosteal layer. There will be multiple lamination of the bone, which is parallel with the shaft. This multiple lamination is the host response to this particular infection. We can also see moth-eaten appearance. This moth-eaten appearance is because of the necrotic tissue which has formed when the organism is trying to eat away the bone. We also have multiple scallop erosions. In chronic osteomyelitis, all these features will be present. In addition, we'll have an intense area of sclerosis and also elevated periosteum. We can see in chronic osteomyelitis sequestrum and involucrum as an additional finding. Next comes is the computer tomography. How does it help? It helps in taking needle biopsy in closed infection. Supposing the wound is not open, how do we go for it? How do we go for the biopsy? CT scan helps us. CT scan also helps in doing a preoperative planning to detect if there is any osseous abnormalities, if there are any foreign bodies or necrotic bone and soft tissue. It also helps in assessment of the bone integrity, if there is any cortical disruption or if there is any soft tissue involvement or not. CT scan also tell us, it could also help us in telling whether edema is present or not. Intraosseous fistula and cortical defects that lead to soft tissue sinus tracts, they're also demonstrated. This is a 45-year-old, this is a CT scan of a 45-year-old man who was complaining of persistent pain over his mid-diaphyseal region. When we got a CT scan of this particular patient, there was diffuse thickening and remodeling of the humeral shaft. There was small healing cloaca at this distal humeral shaft also, and also present here. There was another large more distal surgical tract with a sclerotic bone fragment seen within. The next imaging modality that we can go for is a magnetic resonance imaging. It's a very useful modality for detecting osteomyelitis. It helps us gauge the success of therapy. We have different findings in T1 weighted images and T2 weighted images. In T1 weighted images, the signal intensity is poor, whereas in cases of T2 weighted images, the signal intensity are increased. Increased intensity on T2 weighted images indicate that there has been a formation of sinus tract, and a decrease. One needs to understand that a decrease intensity on T1 weighted images with no change on T2 weighted images, they may indicate surgical or post-traumatic scarring of the bone marrow. Ultrasonography has also been found to be quite useful for the diagnosis of osteomyelitis. The presence of fluid collection adjacent to the bone, if there are no intervening soft tissue, usually suggests osteomyelitis. There will be elevation of the periosteum and also there will be thickening of the periosteum. It is useful for all those patients, supposing the patient is having an orthopedic implant and MRI is contraindicated for certain reasons. We can go for an ultrasonography in those patients. The next investigation that we can go is for nuclear medicine imaging. We have 3 subheadings for this. We can have bone scintigraphy, we can have indium 111 labeled WBC scintigraphy, and gallium 67 scintigraphy. The bone scintigraphy, how does it help? There will be increased osteoblastic activity, which results in increased levels of radiotracer uptake in the surrounding bone, usually both on the blood pool and the delayed views. It is highly sensitive, but it's not specific. We have indium 111 labeled WBC scintigraphy. It is useful in cases of diabetic osteomyelitis, especially when it is combined with technetium-99m phosphonate imaging. However, at right now, MRI is now generally used in conjunction with plain films. It is quite this kind of investigation is quite useful if the patient is having an orthopedic implant or if the patient is having vertebral osteomyelitis. If the patient is having ulcer in the bedridden patient, we can go for this investigation. So Indium, this investigation, this is an image of this particular investigation. We can see there is an ulcer of the first right toe. There is focal uptake on bone scintigraphy, which is concordant with the another investigation, HFPAO, accumulation on leukocyte scintigraphy. The diagnosis for this patient was osteomyelitis of the right first toe. The next is the gallium-67 scintigraphy. Whenever there is inflammation, iron gets released into the surrounding tissue. So what does gallium do? It attaches to the transferrin. This transferrin it has leaked out from the bloodstream into the areas of inflammation. As a result of it, there will be an increased isotope uptake on infection, sterile inflammatory condition, and malignancy. This imaging is usually done only post 18 to 72 hours of injection, and it is performed in conjunction with radionuclide imaging. The one difficulty with gallium is that it does not show any bony detail particularly well, and it does not help us in distinguishing whether it is between bone or nearby soft tissue inflammation. Gallium scan may reveal abnormal accumulation in patients who have active osteomyelitis when technetium scans reveal decreased activity or perhaps normal activity. So it has an advantage over technetium scans. Supposing the technetium scan is telling us a normal report, gallium scan will reveal an abnormal accumulation in those patients. So there is concept of all further investigations. The gallium accumulation may also correlate more closely with inflammatory activity in cases of osteomyelitis than does technetium uptake. PET-CT is a very new technique which have come up for the diagnosis of osteomyelitis. FDG PET, they may have the highest diagnostic accuracy for confirming or excluding the chronic osteomyelitis in comparison with bone scintigraphy, MRI, or leukocyte scintigraphy. It is superior to leukocyte scintigraphy in detecting chronic osteomyelitis in the axial skeleton. Bone biopsy is very confirm. It is for definite diagnosis, and it should be performed through the uninfected bone tissue, and either before the initiation of the antibiotic or more than 48 hours after the discontinuance of the antibiotic. We can go for an open technique or a percutaneous needle biopsy technique. This procedure they may not be necessary if the blood cultures are positive, because if the blood culture comes out to be positive, if the clinician doesn't want to go for a biopsy, he or she can negate out that investigation. Only if the blood cultures are negative and the clinician is suspecting a high degree of suspicion for osteomyelitis, then they can go for a biopsy. When the clinical suspicion is high, but the blood cultures and the needle biopsy have yielded negative results, a repeat needle biopsy or an open biopsy, they should be done. A bone sample, they can be collected at the time of the debridement for histopathological diagnosis in patient with compromised vasculature. Now coming to the histological findings, in cases of acute osteomyelitis, if we look under the microscope, we'll have a lot of acute inflammatory cells. There will be edematous, there will be vascular congestion and small vessel thrombosis. Whereas in case of chronic osteomyelitis, because the duration has been more than 2 years, there will be an abundant lymphocyte. The abundance of lymphocytes will tell us that it's a specimen of chronic osteomyelitis and not of acute osteomyelitis. This is a histopathological examination of the slide. These areas are, this is a slide of a patient who is having chronic osteomyelitis, and there has been an acute exacerbation of the disease. So these are the acute changes of that osteomyelitis, and these are the chronic changes in the same slide. Now coming to the medical therapy and the surgical, coming to the management part of osteomyelitis, we can manage the patient of osteomyelitis either medically or surgically. Medical therapy are usually indicated for acute osteomyelitis. Only the diagnosis is made early. We can the antibiotics are started empirically. Once the report of the blood culture are come, we can shift from empirical therapy to definitive therapy. And also we go for the antibiotic sensitivity testing, because antibiotic resistance, and also we can come if we find out the particular organism, we can direct our antibiotic accordingly. So the medical therapy, we have identification of the pathogen. It is done at the time of bone biopsy or debridement. We initiate with parenteral antibacterial treatment. Once the organism is identified, the treatment may be modified. The oral antibiotics that are quite commonly used are the clindamycin, rifampicin, trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole, or fluoroquinolones. Clindamycin, they are given orally. It has got an excellent bioavailability. It is quite effective against the gram-positive bacteria, including the staphylococci. Quinolones, they are effective against the gram-negative organism. It has got an excellent oral absorption. Linezolid, they're active against the MRSA bacteria and the vancomycin-resistant enterococci. The mechanism of action being, it is inhibiting the bacterial protein synthesis. It has got an excellent bone penetration, and it is given IV or orally. Usually in our hospital setting, my consultant usually prefer linezolid given to a patient of osteomyelitis. Under the heading of surgical treatment, the following treatment option consist. The surgical treatment, one needs to keep in mind a picture of chronic osteomyelitis. We are not talking about acute osteomyelitis. We have to go for an adequate drainage. These are the goals of treatment in a surgical management. We have to go for an adequate drainage, then extensive debridement of the necrotic tissue. Then we need to take care of the dead space which have been created post sequestrectomy. Then we need to go for an adequate soft tissue coverage, and also we need to make sure that we restore the blood supply of that particular region. So what are the operative procedures that we can perform? We can go for a sequestrectomy. We can go for a saucerization. We can go for the curettage of the lesion. We can go for an excision of an infected bone, and very rarely perform, we can also go for an amputation of the patient of that particular limb which has been affected by the osteomyelitis. Sequestrectomy. What do we mean by sequestrectomy? This is an image which will help us understand the meaning of sequestrectomy. It means removal of the sequestrum. We will recollect the sequestrum. What do we mean by that? It's a dead piece of the bone. So we are basically removing the dead piece of the bone. If it lies within the medullary cavity, which is usually the case, it usually lies within the medullary cavity, a window is created over the particular sequestrum, and we incise the periosteum, and we take the periosteum both laterally and medially, and we take the whole thing out. Then we can have saucerization. So what in saucerization, what do we do is, this is the narrow mouth, this is the sequestrum. We are basically trying to convert the narrow mouth into a wide mouth. So it means conversion of the broad base. This is the broad base, conversion of the broad base and narrow mouth bone cavity into a narrow base and a broad mouth cavity, so that any material which is present inside this cavity post saucerization, it will be easy for those things to come out. Then once all the sequestrum and all the exudates and everything comes out from this particular site, there is this defect which is created post this procedure. This is the bony gap which has been created. So that needs to be reconstructed. So what are the options do we have for this? We can go for an open bone grafting. We can go for bone grafting with primary or secondary closures. We can go for this antibiotic polymethyl methacrylate beads as a temporary filler of the dead space before reconstruction. We can also go for a local muscle flap and skin grafting with or without bone grafting. We can go for a microvascular transfer of the muscle, myocutaneous flaps, osseous flaps, or osteocutaneous flaps. We can also go for use of bone transport, that is by Elizarov technique. So what is this PMA antibiotic bead chain? The principle of this particular treatment is to deliver high dosage of antibiotic, which is more than the minimal inhibitory concentration of the invading microorganism. The disadvantage of this particular bead is it has been found to inhibit the local immune response by impairing the various phagocytic immune cell. This particular bead, it has got bactericidal activity, which lasts usually around 2 to 4 weeks after placement. And once all the antibiotic has leached out of the bead, it turns the the thing which was benefiting us, it now turns harmful for us. It becomes a foreign body which is inviting bacteria in future. So this is the image where the antibiotic beads are being prepared by the surgeon. This is just a gross specimen where the antibiotic bead was connected. As we can see over here, the antibiotic bead, PMMA bead, which has been kept, usually the antibiotic released for 2 to 4 weeks only. Then we have this biodegradable antibiotic delivery system. This is we can say the next version of that PMMA antibiotic bead. Because it is biodegradable, we have that advantage that it is not anymore foreign. It gets absorbed by the body. So the advantage is the removal of the implant is not required. Some of these biodegradable substrates, they contain osteoinductive and osteoconductive material, which can be used to promote the newborn formation. And it is reabsorbable within 2 months. The only disadvantage with this antibiotic delivery system is we can have purulent discharge. Next come intervention is the Ilizarov technique. It is helpful only in chronic osteomyelitis when there is an infected non-union. How does it help us? It allows radical resection of the infected bone. So this is here, we have the infected bone, which is we go for corticotomy through normal bone, proximal and distal to the area of disease. Then bone is transported until the union is achieved. Hyperbaric oxygen has also been found, but it has to be an add-on and not a sole treatment for osteomyelitis. So it is used only as an adjunct to other traditional method of treatment. Then we have this closed suction drain. The success rate for these kind of procedures it has been found to be around 85%. This method is also known as modified Lautenbach method. The amputation, which is very rarely done, it is preferred in a case with long-standing discharging sinus. If the sinus undergo malignant change, this is the radiograph of a patient who had undergone amputation for the osteomyelitis of the femur bone. Yeah, this is post-amputation radiograph. What are the complications? The complication of acute, these complications are the complication of the acute osteomyelitis complication. We can have septic arthritis, we can have tenosynovitis, we can have thrombophlebitis or deep vein thrombosis, we can have multiple pyogenic abscesses, and also if the antibiotic has been administered, we can have adverse reaction to the antibiotics also. Now the complication because of chronic osteomyelitis are we can have growth disturbances and also limb length discrepancies and deformities. It is usually slow growing and indolent. We have large cold abscesses in these patients. The clinical presentation of TB patient will be same as that of a normal TB patient, only we have an additional finding of bone symptoms. So this is a radiograph of a patient who was complaining of thigh bone. The clinician had gone for an X-ray for this patient. They had found out that the metaphyseal diaphyseal portion of the bone was affected, and a lesion measuring around 2.7 centimeter with a central sclerotic focus was present. There was permeative appearance to the lesion also, but no additional soft tissue component was identified. In cases of TB osteomyelitis, there is very little or no surrounding reactive bone. It can affect epiphysis, diaphysis, or metaphysis, unlike osteomyelitis, which is affecting the metaphysis of the bone. We see eccentric type of osteolysis in cases of TB osteomyelitis. The kind of spread that we see in TB osteomyelitis is transepiphyseal. There is no sequestrum formation, so this helps us differentiate from chronic osteomyelitis. Occasionally, there is destruction in the mid diaphysis of a short tubular bone of the hand, which is known as TB tuberculous dactylitis. This is a radiograph of a patient suffering from tubercular dactylitis. It produces a fusiform enlargement of the entire diaphysis, which is known as spina ventosa. Next, we have Salmonella osteomyelitis. We should recollect that Salmonella was the offending organism in patients who were suffering from sickle cell anemia. Salmonella osteomyelitis is the subacute form of osteomyelitis. It is more commonly seen in children with sickle cell anemia, and usually it occurs during the convalescent phase after an attack of typhoid fever. So a patient who is just recovered or recovering from a typhoid fever and now comes to your OPD with the bone pain, one should diagnose or have a suspicion of Salmonella osteomyelitis in the mind. In case of Salmonella osteomyelitis, multiple bones are affected and usually they are bilateral. Radiologically, if we go, we'll find diaphyseal sclerosis. This is bilaterally. Then we come to this osteomyelitis, which is very uncommon. It's a very rare type of osteomyelitis, usually found in the jaw bones, found in children and young adults. Patients usually have an insidious onset of pain, pyrexia, and swelling. The symptoms, they recur at intervals for several years and they subside gradually. When we go for a radiological investigation, we can see intense sclerosis, which results in thickened bone. These kind of osteomyelitis, they have got a predilection for mandible and the shaft of the long bones. Thank you. Thank you, teachers.
Excellent presentation. As usual, well done. I think Kakatkar sir. I will start with Kakatkar sir's comments and then Gopakumar sir and Kalra sir's comments. And any additional points you would like to add, Kakatkar sir?
Well, I joined a little late, but then whatever I heard after first 15-20 minutes, I think it was a very good presentation. He has taken a lot of pains to prepare the presentation, and he has not just read it, but then he has understood the topic well.
Sir, actually, this boy, I gave him 2 days time only because nobody was coming forward.
Oh.
So he has really done early morning 3 o'clock. He got a message to me today. So he was awake till 3 a.m. in the morning. Gopakumar sir.
Very good, Anuj. Good presentation and.
Yes, sir. Kakatkar sir.
Continue, sir.
No, I have finished. Yeah, I have finished.
Okay, it was a very exhaustive presentation. I think he has covered most of the things. Only thing which he could have done is to complete acute hematogenous osteomyelitis first, and then going into subacute and then to the chronic, because that is the way the questions are asked in the national board. They will say regarding the etiology, pathogenesis, pathology, clinical features, and management of acute hematogenous osteomyelitis. Or they will say a boy coming to the casualty with symptoms suggestive, what treatment will how will you manage the problem? And then he could have gone into subacute osteomyelitis, the classifications and other things, and then finally to chronic osteomyelitis and Searney and Mader classification and the various steps in the management of chronic osteomyelitis. That's the only thing which I can say, because the question, if you look at the question papers, that is either acute or subacute or chronic. That's the way it is asked. Otherwise, he has done extremely well. Everything is there in that presentation, but the only thing is, it is better to compartmentalize them into 3 topics. Okay.
Thank you, sir. There is a request.
That is only my...
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please.
No, I have finished.
Right, sir.
Kalra sir wanted to say something.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Kalra sir unmuted him.
No, sir. Kalra sir.
Good presentation. I checked a question recently in DNB theory. That was on radiological classification of osteomyelitis. That is Searney and Mader, what he was talking. And management according to that. A complete full 15 marks question was there. It's a good presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. There is one request
Gopal,
to
can I
Dr.
add?
Sunit. Sir, there is a request to Dr. Sunit SS from Bangalore. Kindly make me host back because there was some issue with net. So I had to come back within 1 minute's break. So Dr. Sunit made me host. Yes, Kakatkar sir.
Yeah, as far as the antibiotic treatment of osteomyelitis is concerned, I think um, still I think the cephalosporin should be the first choice. Because what I saw in your presentation, Anuj, that you were talking about the clindamycin and linezolid, and um, I think cephalosporins is still the first line because clindamycin as well as linezolid, though they are effective against the gram-positive, including staph, I think they are primarily bacteriostatic antibiotics. So the first choice should be a bactericidal antibiotic, and still the first choice is cephalosporin. Cephalosporin group, you can go for second, third generation cephalosporins as the first line attack because they are the bactericidal antibiotics. And even after getting the culture reports, once you get the culture reports, one should ideally now talk to an infectious disease consultant because I have attended two programs and I have given a talk in one of the programs which is on infections, osteoarticular infections. And it was an eye opener to me. When I attended that program, they had two infectious disease consultants as faculties with us, and they literally clarified number of things in our mind, how to read the sensitivity report and how you should choose the antibiotics. I think the crux is that the first choice should be bactericidal antibiotics rather than bacteriostatic antibiotics. So it is very important to know which are the antibiotics which are bactericidal, and depending on their bactericidal or bacteriostatic properties, even if the MIC levels are uh, more prominent for say a particular antibiotic which is bacteriostatic, you should choose a bactericidal antibiotic. That was the message which was given in that infection control program. Gopakumar sir, I think I will like to have your views on this, and Kalra sir, your views also.
Kalra sir.
I use a very conventional antibiotics to start with.
Like?
Initial ones was the like penicillins, then and we prefer injectable in the wards. And when we discharge them, and we continue to give 6 weeks in the children, and 3 weeks IV, and 3 weeks followed by this. If it is medically treated, if no surgery is indicated.
But then the choice is bactericidal or bacteriostatic?
Bactericidal.
Yeah.
Bactericidal.
Gopakumar sir, your views on that?
Staph ones are the better ones. Unless it is a resistant one not responding and you are suspecting something else, then or there is a sensitivity report is different. Then we go according to the sensitivity.
Gopakumar sir.
Gopakumar sir has...
I think sir has.
And
lost the connection.
One thing which is with clindamycin, it is very much gastric problem. It gives lot of gastritis if given in the proper dose. Clindamycin. It's my experience.
Gopakumar sir is there. Gopakumar sir, kindly unmute yourself.
Anuj, by that time, what do you mean treatment is worse than no treatment?
I want to know your question again, sir.
See, you say that type C, one classification, then treatment is worse than
Yeah, exactly.
not.
It is better
What do
not.
you mean?
It is
What
better
do you-
not. It is better not to treat those patients because we have to assess the risk-benefit ratio in those kind of patients. The patient is,
with comorbidity or what you mean? Which type of patient?
yeah, the patient might have comorbidity. In those kind of patient, if we try to intervene with any intervention, the disease process which is hampering the patient will be in lesser amount. The treatment intervention will hamper the patient more.
No, what type of
Basically,
patient?
There is both physiological hampering, there is both anatomical hampering,
No, which type of patient is specified? Like with diabetes or with radiotherapy or something? What type of
sir,
patient you mean?
sir, type C host is basically immunocompromised patients, sir. Multiple comorbidities and immunocompromised type of patients where host is physiologically very much vulnerable for treatment. Whatever intervention you will do, chances of flaring up of the problem and infection will be much more higher, and benefit out which we are intended we may not get. On the other hand, intervention will exaggerate the problem. That is what type C host in Cierney Madar classification they have
Means
mentioned.
not fit for surgery or something.
Right, sir. Kakatkar sir, your views, and Gopakumar sir. Gopakumar sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell, regarding it is no treatment, it is just antibiotic suppression that you can give for these. It is not no treatment because they are so immunocompromised that doing surgery will not benefit them. So you give prolonged antibiotic treatment just to suppress the disease. As
So we
regarding
may
the
say
management of acute osteomyelitis,
we may
What
say
is
that surgical intervention is risky, but antibiotic we can give treatment.
yeah, that's all.
So no treatment means nothing is to be done.
No treatment is not like no, it's not like that.
Yes.
Then acute osteomyelitis, we usually give cephalosporins. Usually it's the second generation cephalosporin, which is more sensitive against the Staph aureus. And along with that, in children and in neonates and infants, we will start either amikacin or gentamicin. And this will continue till the culture report comes. Nowadays, what we are seeing is many of these cases, not most, many of these cases turn out to be MRSA. So in those cases, linezolid or vancomycin or clindamycin has to be given. So our preference is to give linezolid for these kids, or pediatricians prefer that. And regarding the duration of therapy, actually you need to continue IV antibiotic with the bactericidal antibiotics for 1 week. Then you assess clinically and on the blood parameters like CRP, ESR may still be elevated, and depending upon the response, you may convert to oral antibiotic therapy just to be continued for 4 to 6 weeks. So if you think that the surgeon has to take a decision, and if the surgeon feels that they have to continue IV antibiotics because the response is not very good, they will keep the child in the ward and continue with IV antibiotics. That is how children with osteomyelitis is treated.
Gopakumar sir, Kakatkar sir had a question to you regarding bacteriostatic and bactericidal antibiotic. Which one you will prefer to start with before you get the antibiotic sensitive report?
Yeah, always bactericidal antibiotic.
Sir, Gopakumar sir.
Yeah, we have discussed most of the things regarding safety matter. You would like to describe the diamond in this article. He says should be as low as you want excising a bone and till you get the paprika sign positive. Then the second step will be to has become multiple. Search and by using
Hello. Kanuja sir, your comments. Next presenter, please be ready. Next presenter, please be ready.
I think everything has been said. We can start next.
Gopal
Right,
sir,
sir.
I must be very thankful to you for giving me this opportunity this Sunday.
Very
Well
good.
done, well
Very
done.
good.
But I am a greedy person, Anuj.
Yeah, yeah,
Whatever things advised to you by Gopakumar sir,
right,
go back, just do slight modification in that, and share
right,
that presentation with me. Okay.
right. I'll surely do.
One more thing mixing is guidelines about using antibiotics. As Kakatkar sir has told, it is for all postgraduates benefit. Empirically, you will start with, but IV antibiotic duration, usually they say 2 weeks to start with. If required, extend for a week, and then oral antibiotics for 4 to 6 weeks, depending upon the response.
Right,
For specific resistant cases, you will step up the antibiotics. In war surgery, as in Red Cross and Medicine Sans Frontiers, or these Doctors Without Borders, with whom I work in war surgery scenarios, we follow minimum 2 weeks antibiotic. Cefazolin is drug of choice, which unfortunately is not commonly available in our country. And then we switch over to the oral antibiotics. Okay. So this antibiotic part you will add to that, and try and get the photographs of different shapes of these sequestra. Okay. You have mentioned around 10 types of sequestra. So on net, try and find those images also. That will help for everyone. Okay. I think
right,
with a
right,
very
sir.
short span of time, you have done an excellent job as always. So be ready with one more topic I will assign you. So as and when we
Yeah,
will need, I will ask for you with short notice again. Okay. So
sure,
thank you
surely,
for
sir.
your enthusiasm and great efforts. Uh, Now I am requesting Avinash, are you there? Avinash, are you there?
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And who is your friend from Miraj last time who presented the
Nikhil,
knee injection
Nikhil,
case?
Dr. Nikhil,
So
Dr.
if
Nikhil.
he is there,
Yes, sir.
his homework
Yes,
is
sir.
related to infection. So I would request Nikhil to present first, and then he will present regarding the ossifications. Will that be okay?
Okay, sir. Yes,
Nikhil,
sir.
are
Yes,
you
sir.
there?
Yes.
Just
Yes,
share your
sir.
screen. And before that, I am requesting second time to Dr. Suneet from Bangalore. Please make me host again. I am not able to control few things. If you are there and listening, kindly make me host back. You start with presentation, Nikhil.
Mhm. Yes, sir.
Yes,
Good
start.
evening, teacher. Today's my topic. Last time I was given homework about the osteomyelitis. So, in introduction, the first of all, osteomyelitis is a term coined by the Nelaton in 1834. So, osteon means bones, myelo means marrow, and itis means inflammation. So, in definition, it is defined as the inflammation of the bone caused by an infective organism. It may remain localized or it may spread through the bone to involve the marrow, cortex, periosteum, and soft tissue surrounding the bone. So, on the classification, the classify on the basis of three duration and the type. Second one is the on the basis of mechanism, and third one is the type of host response. So on the basis of duration and the type, so acute is the duration is less than 2 weeks, early acute and late acute, it's 4 to 5 days. In subacute is approx 2 to 6 weeks, and it is less virulent and more immune. And chronic osteomyelitis is usually more than 6 weeks, and usually classic associated with the sequestrum and discharging sinus. On the basis of mechanism, there's the exogenous like a trauma, surgery, iatrogenic, or a contagious infection. And second one is the hematogenous like a bacteremia. So causative organism according to the age group. So first is the patient age is a neonate. In neonate, most common is the Staphylococcus influenza. More than 2 years of age is against Staphylococcus aureus. And the young adult who is healthy and sexually active is the Neisseria gonorrhoeae. And the elderly adult, the most common is Staphylococcus aureus in most of the 50% of the cases. Then Streptococcus and gram-negative bacilli. They, according to the structural abnormalities like aspiration or the injection against Staphylococcus aureus, and the trauma, gram-negative bacilli, anaerobes, and Staph aureus again. And in case of prosthesis like replacement, if there is a early infection, then infection with the staph epidermis. If there is a late, then the gram positive foci or anaerobe. In medical condition like IV drug abuser drug use, injection drug use, there is a typical gram negative bacilli like Pseudomonas species, rheumatoid arthritis against Staph aureus, then SLE and systemic lupus erythematosus and the sickle cell anemia Salmonella species. In hemophilia there is Staph aureus and Streptococcus and gram-negative bacilli. In immunosuppressant patient like HIV, then the Staph aureus again, and Mycobacterium species and the fungus infection. So overall, that Mycobacteria enters into the bone by following three ways. The hematogenous spread usually involve the metaphysis of the long bone in children or the vertebral body in the adult. Second is the direct inoculation of the microorganism into the bone penetrating injuries, and the surgical contamination are most common cause. And the contagious focus of the infection seen in the patient with the severe vascular disease, the microorganism bone causing osteomyelitis. So in pathogenesis, the bacteriological seeding of the bone generally is associated with the other factors like the localized trauma, chronic illness, malnutrition, or the inadequate immune system like HIV condition. So in such condition, bacterial seeding leads to inflammatory reaction, which can cause the local ischemic necrosis of the bone and subsequent abscess formation. As the abscess enlarge, the intramedullary pressure increases and causing cortical ischemia, which may allow purulent material to escape through the cortex and into the subperiosteal space. So they subsequently there is a subperiosteal abscess then develops. If left untreated this condition, this process eventually result in the extensive sequester formation and the chronic osteomyelitis. And then figure is showing that there is subperiosteal abscess, and broadly it is divided into three types: acute hematogenous osteomyelitis, then subacute hematogenous osteomyelitis, and third one is a chronic osteomyelitis. So in acute hematogenous osteomyelitis, the bimodal incidence, the duration is less than 2 weeks, the bimodal incidence less than 2 years and 8 to 12 years. Most common in male and most commonly involve the metaphysis because of the following reasons. There is a hairpin bend like vessel, the relatively low phagocyte, repetitive mycotrauma, and the other reasons are the dead cells from the physis, which are the base for the growth of bacteria. And the risk factor for the development of the acute hematogenous osteomyelitis like a local trauma, chronic illness, malnutrition, immunocompromised patient. So most common organism in Staph aureus, and clinical feature is a severe pain and local tenderness is the most common, and the swelling, fever, and the local rise in temperature. They are the classical feature in the acute hematogenous osteomyelitis. And this is the in diagnosis there is history and physical examination. The history of there is a trauma and on physical examination you will get the swelling, fever, and the local rise in temperature. In laboratory investigation there is the increase in WBC, SRCRP, and the neutrophil count. X-ray shows soft tissue swelling, shows soft tissue swelling in the 1 to 3 days, and periosteal reaction and the bony destruction. It is after the infection 2 to 3 weeks of infection.
Just Gopal.
Sir.
There is something repetition. So he can
Sir,
say just
sir.
this has been told already. This has been told already. So we can.
Yes.
We,
Yeah.
can
Sir,
Nikhil?
we
Yes, sir.
can skip few
This-
things, but it's better to have repetition, sir. Few
No, no, no.
homework topics they are different,
No,
sir.
see, those things which have been told just now, he can just say these things have already been told,
Yes, sir.
because lot of
Yes, sir.
things are there for informative.
Yes,
But
sir.
like swelling and other thing, pain and other thing, duration, which has, you have been listening this. So with things which have
Nikhil,
been
just
told
skip those
already, you can
slides.
cut short.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You can just say that these are the things which have been told.
Yes, sir.
So please say
Sir,
the
in management of the acute hematology and osteomyelitis, there is add-on to the NADIS principle of treatment of acute osteomyelitis, in which there is a first principle is an appropriate antibiotic is effective before the pus or abscess formation. Then antibiotic do not sterilize the avascular tissue or the abscess. As such, area requires surgical debridement. In such, if such removal is effective, third principle is if such removal is effective, the antibiotic should prevent their reformation and primary wound closure should be the same. Then fourth is one is the surgery should not damage surgery should not be damage already ischemic and soft tissue. And the fifth one is the antibiotic should vary. So indication for surgery in acute hematology is the presence of the abscess requiring drainage and the failure of the patient to get intravenous antibiotic treatment. So IV antibiotic should be continued for the 6 weeks. In subacute hematogenous osteomyelitis, so more insidious onset and lack of severity of the symptom. This is the main. The in clinical feature, the indolent course of the subacute osteomyelitis is due to increased host resistance, decreased bacterial virulence, and third one is the administration of the antibiotic before the onset of the symptom. So in subacute hematogenous osteomyelitis, systemic sign and symptom are minimal. Temperature is only mildly elevated and mild to moderate pain. So this is the classification. This is a radiological classification of the subacute osteomyelitis, in which type 1 is the central metaphyseal lesion.
Skip the slide. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And second, there is another classification about subacute osteomyelitis. The Gladel classification. These are type 1 is the solitary localized zone of radiolucences surrounded by reactive new bone formation. In type 2 is the metaphyseal radiolucences with cortical erosion. In type 3 there is a cortical hyperostosis in diaphysis with no onion skin reaction. And in type 4 is the subperiosteal new bone formation and the onion skin layering. And again, second classification is Robert Atter classification, in which type 1 is the punch out radiolucences. Then type 2 is the punch out radiolucences with lesion with the sclerotic margin. Then again, direct type 3, there is no type 2 in the Robert. So type 3 is the localized cortical periosteal reaction. And type 4 is the onion skin periosteal reaction. Type 6 is the central radiolucency in epiphysis. And type 6 is the destructive process involving vertebral body. So I will give that a diagnosis part. On the Brody's abscess. This is the localized form of the subacute osteomyelitis, occurring most commonly in the long bone of the lower extremity. The intermittent pain of the long duration is the most time presenting complaint, and the along with the tenderness over the affected area. So the X-ray showing the Brody's abscess, there is a radiolucent area surrounded by the sclerotic margin. On plain radiograph, it appears like a lytic lesion with the sclerotic rim of the sclerotic bone.
Yes, skip the slide. Skip the slide.
Yes, sir. So second is the sclerosing osteomyelitis of Gare, in which there is a sclerosing osteomyelitis is a chronic form of the disease in which bone is thickened and distended, but abscess and sequestra are absent. The disease affects children and young adults, causing the cause is unknown, but it is thought to be an infection caused by low-grade, possibly anaerobic bacteria. Clinical picture in the moderate intermittent pain for a longer duration and swelling and tenderness present over the bone. X-ray, there is expanded bone with generalized sclerosis. Treatment, no treatment predictably helpful, but fenestration of the sclerotic bone and the antibiotic is given. In chronic osteomyelitis, the hallmark of the chronic osteomyelitis is sequestrum. Sequestrum, so it is defined as the infected avascular dead bone detached from the viable bone, surrounded by the infected granulation tissue and the pus. So these are the types as told according to the shape. Pencil-like is infant, cylindrical and tubular is infant, ring type sequestrum in external fixator, conical and annular in the amputation stub. According to the consistency, coke-like in tuberculosis, feathery in pyogenic and syphilis, and sand-like in tubercular osteomyelitis and metaphysis. And according to the color, black is amputation stub and green is pseudomonas osteomyelitis. As the involucrum it is defined as immature subperiosteal reactive living new bone formation around the sequestrum. The treatment related importance of the involucrum is the only if three walls of the involucrum are seen fully on two perpendicular view should the sequestration is undertaken. Otherwise, pathological fracture will result. So this is the again is the cloaca. Cloaca is the involucrum become the perforated with the hole through which first discharge occur called cloaca. This is the picture showing the sequestrum and the periosteal new bone formation. And this is the specimen of the sequestrum. This Cerny-Matar classification as told by Anusha. So I will click this side.
Just keep it.
Treatment principle. The principle of management of the chronic osteomyelitis. Only principle: debridement, sequestrectomy, that is the removal of the sequestrum, nephrotic bone, tissue and debris, and saucerization. Second is the stabilization of bone. Third one is the obtaining the intra-op culture, sent for the biopsy and the culture sensitivity. Fourth one is the dead space management. That is with the first one is the non-biodegradable like a PMM beads, biodegradable like a calcium sulfate beads, like it came with the brand name with the stimulant, the calcium phosphate cement, the polyglycolic acid, polylactic acid, and the polylactic acid. Other ones with the local muscle or the mycocutaneous flap or free flap or composite flap. And the fourth one is the autogenous cancellous bone grafting. That is the Papineau technique of the open eye. Fourth is the local antibiotic treatment and soft tissue coverage, and last one is the systemic antibiotic treatment. So there is a few definitions like a wound. So the wound is defined as a breach in continuity of the skin or the mucous membrane. And the ulcer, it is defined as the persistent breach in the continuity of the skin or the mucous membrane associated with the cell death. Or another, it is defined as the break in continuity of the covering epithelium, that is either skin or mucous membrane due to the molecular death. The picture showing and the part of ulcer, the margin. Margin is the junction between the normal epithelium and the ulcer. This is the margin. This is normal epithelium and the ulcer. Then the edge is area between the margin and the ulcer. Then the floor, what that part is exposed, that floor, and the base on which ulcer is raised. Thank you,
Okay.
sir.
Avinash, you stop sharing your screen, Nikhil. Good presentation.
Yes, sir.
Covered almost whatever was told to you. Avinash, start your presentation.
One thing regarding acute osteomyelitis in children is we used to say that decompression because of inflammation. There is a pressure beneath the osteomyelitis, and that itself is very painful and leads to necrosis, cell death also.
Avinash, share your screen. Yes, sir.
Decompression was one of the reason for puncturing those bones.
Yeah. It was for both the purposes. It is to decompress. At the same time, you can get the culture, and once you know the organism, then the specific antibiotics can be started.
So many times pus used to come.
Yeah, there used to be a frank pus draining out from that, and that is still valid. It is still followed in acute osteomyelitis.
Third reason could be, sir, whenever pus formation continues, subperiosteal spread and thereby more destruction goes on. So to stop that process, decompress and give chance for early pain relief and healing could be the possible third reason, sir.
Yeah, what happens is that if the infection opens out into the subperiosteal space, then it spreads along the periosteum, and then there is the entire diaphysis which gets involved, and then you can land up with a diaphyseal sequestrum, which is a difficult situation to tackle. So it is better before it spreads underneath the periosteum and causes the entire diaphysis involvement. better to make drill holes and sometimes even a small window and drain out everything so that you decompress the areas, prevent the spread, get the proper antibiotic report because of the culture sensitivity. Plus, you can even send a tissue for culture and the biopsy.
Yes, sir. Avinash, quickly finish your
Yes, sir.
presentation. Start.
Yes, sir. Good evening, everyone. My presentation is about ossification center around the major joints. Ossification center. Am I audible to everyone?
Yes, yes, clearly.
Hello.
Yes,
Am I
yes.
audible?
Yes,
Yes.
clear.
Ossification center. Ossification center around wrist. There are ossification center on the wrist can be divided into two components, namely carpal bone ossification center, distal radial and ulnar ossification center. Ossification of the carpal bones. Ossification of carpal bones occurs in predictable sequence, starting with capitate and ending with pisiform. At birth, there is no calcification in the carpal bones, although there is a great individual variability. Approximate ossification times are as follows. Capitate ossifies center appear at 1 to 3 months, then hamate appear around 2 to 4 months, then triquetrum appears upon 2 to 3 years, lunate appears around 2 to 4 years, scaphoid appears around 4 to 6 years, then trapezium appears around 4 to 6 years, trapezoid appears around 4 to 6 years, and pisiform appear around 8 to 12 years. In this slide, we can see that in the X-ray one, around 2 to 3 months old child, then capitate and hamate are appeared, and then excluding the pisiform, a simple way to remember the order of classification is to start at the capitate, then move in anti-clockwise direction on the volar surface of the right carpus. Ossification center of distal radius L ulna. Distal radius ossifies around 1 year and distal ulna ossifies around 5 to 6 years. Ossification center around elbow. Elbow ossification occurs at 6 elbow ossification center in reproducible order. Being familiar with the order of ossification of the elbow is important in not mistaking an epicondylar fracture for a normal ossification center. The order of appearance of elbow ossification is highly reliable and most individual is consistent. We remember in mnemonic as cry toe, capitulum, radial head, internal epicondyle, trochlear olecranon, external epicondyle. Then two counting methods are taught to help to remember the ages at which the ossification center appear is 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 7 year, 9 year, 11 year. First is capitulum. This appear at around 1 year. Radial head appears upon 3 years. Then internal or medial epicondyle appears around 5 years. Trochlea appear at around 7 years. Olecranon center appear at around 9 years. Then external epicondyle approximately around 11 years. Entire capitulum, radial head, internal epicondyle, olecranon, trochlean, we can see. Then ossification center related to hip joint. Pelvic bone in which ilium first appears around 12 weeks in utero. Ischium appears 4 to 5 months in utero. Pubis 5 to 6 months in utero. Acetabulum 2 center appear at puberty. Ilium, ischium, and pubis all fuse at around 7 to 9 years. Acetabulum fusion occurs at around 20 to 25 years. These are the three centers. Proximal femur. This is most important. Femur shaft appears at around 7 weeks in utero. Femur head approximately around 6 to 12 months. Greater trochanter appear at around 2 to 4 years. Lesser trochanter appears at puberty. All of the femoral ossification centers fuse between ages of 14 and 18 years. Here we can see the various stages of appearance of femur. Then ossification center of femur, as I said in previous slide, head, greater trochanter, lesser trochanter. Ossification center around knee. Distal femur appear at around 9 months of fetal life, fuses with shaft around 20 years of life. Patella ossification center appear between 1 to 3 years. It fuses at around 3 to 5 years. We can see radiograph of 3-year-old male. Proximal tibia. tibial shaft appears 6-7 weeks in utero, tibial plateau 9 months in utero, and tibial tuberosity by 10 to 12 years. Ossification of tibia proximal end, as I said in the previous slide, distal end fuses around 15 to 17 years. The proximal fibula appears around 8 weeks in utero and fibular head around 2 to 4 years. Ossification center around ankle, lower end of tibia, secondary center appear at around 2 years, fuses with shaft at 18 years, lower end of fibula, secondary center appears in first year and fuses at around 16 years, except for the calcaneum. Tarsal bone ossifies from one center each, calcaneum and talus in 6 fetal months, cuboid at birth, cuneiform and navicular at 1 to 3 years of age. Secondary center of calcaneus ossifies in posterior aspect of the bone at 5 years. Its density may be very irregular in normal foot, but it fuses at puberty. Secondary ossification center of metatarsal and phalanges appear by 3 years and fuses by 18 years. Thank you.
So 2 important points. At birth, distal end of the femur ossification center has a medico-legal importance.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and in that
Yes.
thing, you should know medico-legally important ossification centers at the time of birth. Okay, so
Yes, sir.
usually
Yes, sir.
one primary center for long bone, except clavicle. Okay, I think
Yes, sir.
just stop sharing your screen. Today's
Yes.
class was bit vast, so now I will request senior faculties to comment regarding today's class. To start with, I will request Kanojia sir first to start with.
I think first presentation was quite good, and as Gopal sir has told, so he will do. Only thing my suggestion is that once 2 people are presenting the case, they should interact with each other and there should not be overlapping, because he has covered a lot of things which were not there and something was overlapping. That is my suggestion.
Right, sir.
Otherwise, it was good.
Kalra sir, if he is there. Gopa Kumar sir, your
Good
comment,
attempt
sir.
by all.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please.
Kalra sir is
Kalra
there.
sir.
Carla sir is there.
Good
Sir,
attempt by all the students, but overextended little bit.
I know, sir. I am culprit, sir. I know.
Thank you.
Sir. Gopa Kumar sir.
Yeah, it was a very fruitful session. I think everybody has learned quite a lot. And only thing is if you can reduce the duration of the talks, because Kalra sir has just seen the DNB questions. They get only around 16 minutes to answer one question. So that if they want to prepare for that, they will have to finish the talk by 10 to 12 minutes. Then only they will be able to write in 15 minutes.
Right,
So,
sir.
for information, this may be good. For practical training, if you make a talk for 45 minutes, that is not very useful for the writing the exam. That's the only thing which I want to say.
Right, sir. I think for this is directly instruction to me. I think I will now henceforth will try and concise while giving the homework to the students, sir. Thank you, sir.
Otherwise,
Sir,
what you can do is make a symposium on
Right,
bone
sir.
infection. Give one part to one student, second part to second student, and three persons will take 3 different aspects. That will be
Right,
better.
sir. Right, sir. I think, but sir, students they don't come forward easily. This symposium,
Okay.
I told him 2 days back because no one was coming forward for case presentation. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Kakatkar sir, your concluding remarks, sir. Kakatkar sir. I think Kakatkar sir is not, must be having some net related issue.
अभी दिख तो रहा है.
हाँ दिख रहे हैं, लेकिन वो शायद नेट का कोई इश्यू हो सकता है. Meantime, I'll take comments from Uday Kumar sir. Uday Kumar sir.
Hello.
Sir, sorry, sir. I joined very late. Good evening, Kanoj sir.
अरे
Katkar sir,
उदय कुमार
Dr.
सर, आपको
Kagra
देखा
sir.
नहीं बहुत दिनों से, तो ऐसा लगता है सूरज
Sir,
उदय नहीं हुआ.
Sir, I am held up in a surgery, sir. Sorry,
अच्छा.
from
Oh,
5 o'clock onwards, sir.
Yes, you have already informed.
I thought I could finish it before 7:30, but it's still going on, sir. Sorry, sir. But
No
I'm very
problem.
happy to see all of you.
Yes.
And I joined at the sequestrum. They were sequestrum when he was telling sequestrum. But as far as I heard everything, it was a very crisp presentation. The last two presentations, but the
Okay,
first
sir.
one I did not join, sir. I could not join.
Okay. Thank you,
And
sir.
my
Kakatkar
apologies
sir.
to everyone, sir.
Thank you, sir. Kakatkar sir, your concluding remarks. Kindly unmute. Kakatkar sir. I think Kakatkar sir, we are not able to communicate. Gopakumar sir, with your permission, can we call off the day, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Thank